I'm Alex, this is New Game Plus, and welcome to the After Party. When I quit drinking, I was met with two primary responses. From my foreign friends and customers and from Japanese women, I heard, "Oh, good for you." But from Japanese men, the most common response was, "What do you mean?" Alcohol is tied to masculinity in many cultures, but especially in Japan, where in order for men to save face, alcoholism isn't even defined quite the same way it is in the West. I was fortunate enough to have a strong social group that doesn't really care if I don't drink. But I realize I was a special case. I was the sole proprietor of a local establishment. I didn't have to worry about going to Nomikais or drinking with coworkers. And honestly, in my new life as a self-employed internet gadfly, I still don't. My social forays these days are kept to a minimum, and that's the way I like it. I go to one function every 2 or 3 months to catch up with friends, and when I've had enough of it, I go out of the door that is there. But depending on your employer, Nomikais, or drinking parties, are still kind of an obligation to many in Japan. This is the first video where I will tell you outright, I have no advice for this. Obviously, not every Japanese company has a drinking problem. But the ritual of the Nomikai is, in my estimation, one of the more damaging elements of Japanese corporate culture. In 10 years behind the bar, I entertained hundreds of Nomikais. I saw scores of haggard salarymen laugh awkwardly at their boss's jokes between yawns. I saw workers unable to handle their alcohol, but also unable to refuse the boss when he gave them more. I saw people cave to emotional outbursts, yell, cry, fall asleep, and vomit, not necessarily in that order. It's a practice that is propped up by the cultural belief that being drunk is the only appropriate time to express your emotions or truly connect with colleagues. If you have any passing familiarity with Japan, you've probably heard of honne and tatemae. Honne refers to one's true feelings, while tatemae refers to the guarded, more diplomatic things we are forced to say in polite company. Alcohol allows Japanese people to let their honne loose, to let their ego out of its besuited cage until last call. This by itself isn't unhealthy. Having a few drinks with coworkers in a relaxed atmosphere is a normal way of winding down in almost any culture. The problem is that for most people in Japan, it's kind of the only way. Japan's not big on things like self-expression or opinions, especially in a work setting. Enter alcohol, the culturally sanctioned truth serum that office workers have traditionally relied upon for what is called Nomunication. Nomunication is a portmanteau of nomu, meaning to drink, and communication. It's a new label for an old concept, with cultural roots stretching back to Japan's agrarian past. But the modern term comes with a rather bleak implication. From a Western perspective, it may even seem like a tacit admission of the entire office's personal or emotional repression. Nomunication is based on the notion that only alcohol can break down the rigid barriers that Japanese society insists we maintain at all times. Culturally, this serves the purpose of building camaraderie and keeping the team focused on immediate corporate concerns such as production or sales performance. In terms of mental and emotional wellness, however, it's kinda gross. Pressuring employees into drinking for the purpose of team building is bad enough, but it's the slow creeping effects this can have on people's psyches that truly make Nomikai culture dangerous. When you create a condition in which your mind only gets the emotional release it needs when your blood is pumped full of alcohol, that's bad. But if you also happen to be genetically predisposed toward alcoholism, you're practically setting yourself up for it. This is why Japan's clinical definition of alcohol dependence syndrome is a lot more forgiving than Western models. Japanese society isn't simply letting alcoholics slip through the cracks, it's actively mashing the entire workforce up against those cracks. In her paper, Nectai Alcoholics, Cultural Forces and Japanese Alcoholism, Keiko Kato breaks down exactly how and why alcohol-related misbehavior by salarymen is tolerated. She outlines the Kurihama Alcoholism Screening Test, the dominant metric for diagnosing alcohol dependency among Japan's salarymen, whom she refers to as Nectai Alcoholics. CAST was designed to avoid categorizing salarymen as alcoholics because many of these people are considered normal drinkers in Japanese society, but are problem drinkers according to Western tests. The Japanese practice of bureiko, which encourages inebriety while drinking, has the cultural function to unite the people of a group. Because of this, some characteristics of alcoholics in US society are not considered deviant, but are rather expected in Japanese society, and therefore not valid as criteria to define alcoholics. It is this cultural attitude towards drinking that is the bottleneck in solving the problems of Nectai alcoholics in Japanese society. She goes on to say that people who show alcohol dependence syndrome but have not yet become a problem for society, unemployed, public troublemakers, etc., are not considered alcoholics in Japan. Because of this, salaryman's drinking is overlooked by society. Even though he is inebriated and troublesome, society perceives him as a hard-working salaryman who is drinking as part of his work. In other words, society gives salarymen a free pass most of the time when it comes to disruptive or reckless behavior because where would the economy be without them? Do OLs, or office ladies, their female counterparts, get the same pass? You have one guess. Bad behavior aside, Japan's drinking culture can also be a fast track to mental instability and emotional discord via self-medication. The more time a young person spends around Japanese Nomikai culture, the more they are socially conditioned to go directly to alcohol when they need to unpack their feelings. As a result, they may lose the ability to manage and regulate their emotions outside the presence of the substance, not unlike the destructive cycle into which I fell. It's a kind of learned emotional helplessness, conveniently and culturally repackaged as macho stoicism. The good news is that Keiko's article was written in 2000, and the test she references was revised slightly in 2003. Cultural change is an infamously glacial process in Japan, but things have improved a bit since then. In 2025, there are plenty of Japanese people and companies who understand that this mindset and this behavior are outdated and unhealthy. Companies with younger and/or non-male leadership tend to put less emphasis on the Nomikai, and the COVID-19 pandemic also seems to have knocked it down a peg. Groups like the All Nippon Sobriety Association and the White Chrysanthemum Society encourage their members to talk about their trauma in a group setting like AA, but without the religious angle. And mental health awareness as a general concept is continuing to slowly grow in Japan. Organizations like TEL provide emergency mental health support services for anyone in the country, even if you don't speak Japanese. In fact, I'm going to throw their crisis hotline number on screen and encourage you to take a quick screenshot if you're in Japan and watching this on your phone, because you never know when it might come in handy. If you drink, and you're okay with it, then yeah, drinking to strengthen group bonds can be beneficial for some people. But not if you're relying on it as the only way, and certainly not when you're forced to do it. In writing this video, I came across a blog written by a user called Gakuwari, a salaryman in his 40s who proudly writes, "For about 3 years now, I've been thinking that drinking parties are a waste of time. Even if I don't have plans, I make sure to miss the event. I still like alcohol and drinking parties," he says, "but I skip the ones that are a waste of time. These kinds of parties mainly consist of complaints about the company or gossiping about colleagues. I am grateful that I don't have to worry about this anymore, but I do have friends here who are still expected to show up and knock back a few at the office when they'd rather be at home spending time with their family." On a personal note, I do acknowledge that drinking to vent or even just process your feelings is a tricky thing to unlearn. Appropriate emotional release is something that I'm still working on properly regulating. I didn't have a healthy handle on it before or during my drinking, but it is something that I am slowly starting to navigate. When my dad passed, my mom offhandedly mentioned that he never once cried in front of her. That's not good. I know he was of that generation, but that's not a healthy way to go through life. In fact, it's symptomatic of the stubborn disposition that was ultimately responsible for taking him from us early. Just like his Japanese counterparts, my dad was raised in a culture where men simply weren't equipped to express their emotions in a healthy way, because nobody ever taught them how. I remember during my first couple years of sobriety how anytime my wife and I went to the movies, I would have savage emotional reactions to whatever we saw. It was my mind's way of shifting and reacclimatizing to a natural emotional state, to no longer relying on alcohol to let me know when it's okay to open the floodgates. 5 years on, I am closer to having measured and regular reactions to things I would not have had when all my emotional instruments were clogged and inoperable. It can feel alien at first, but establishing or re-establishing an emotional baseline is something that is going to happen to you naturally as you stop drinking. And quite frankly, you need it to happen. Speaking of needs, I need to move on to Q&A. Jake Spencer Design writes, "I've never had a sip of alcohol, but I suspect someone in my life may be dependent on it. What kind of support can I offer without coming off as presumptive or judgmental? When I was drinking, nothing anybody ever said to me ever got through because I preferred living in the fantasy. And people were expressing their concerns. But I ignored them. I ignored all of reality until my mistakes became too big to ignore and immediate action had to be taken. This is why people organize interventions. A concerted effort by a group of concerned friends and family can illustrate to this person how their behavior has become disruptive and dangerous. I don't know how close you are to this person or how far you're willing to go for them, but if an intervention seems like too much, you could just write them an actual physical letter. If someone close to me had an addiction, that's probably what I would do. Thanks, Jake! Frumius Gaming writes, could you talk a bit about what you did find helpful in AA? I have considered going to a similar group and was put off mostly by all the higher power stuff. As someone who also has issues with that part but still went for a year and found it beneficial, what about it did work for you? The immediate benefit of AA is the quick and dirty therapy you get. At meetings, I could vent about myself and my problems for as long as I needed to get it out of my system, and it is something you're gonna need to do. Conversely, listening to everyone else's stories allows you to pick up additional lessons and perspectives. I would then take this entire experience back to my actual therapist for additional insight. The group has knowledge and experience that you can draw from even after the meeting. If you hit it off with someone just talking in the parking lot and you start texting and hanging out, you've increased your support network. The religious aspect of AA is downplayed in Japan, and maybe that's why I was able to stick with it for an entire year. But I'm glad I did. By the time I left, I had built up enough confidence to talk openly about these things with other people in my life. Thanks, Froom! One controller port asks, without a formal autism diagnosis, what type of advice and techniques do you find most helpful in your life? This is a response to episode 3 where I talk about my possible autism and its relation to alcohol use disorder. I am not a doctor, but from what I gather, having ASD1 diagnosed well into adulthood is less consequential if you're already fully functional. It's a developmental disorder, and I'm already developed. On the other hand, confirmation of your condition can help you recontextualize and better understand events from your past, if that's important to you. In discussing the possibility of ASD1 with my therapist, I gained insight into how my slide towards dependency may have started and been sustained, and how I can avoid it from happening again. For a while, I thought diagnosis was important to me. But all of my tendencies that I might chalk up to ASD1, the social masking, repetitive behavior, deep focus, inflexibility, hypersensitivity, these are not unique to autism. How I decide to label these traits is inconsequential because they aren't going away. The way to deal with them is the same way that you have been, as a collection of quirks and annoyances that you've learned to adjust to. Because at the end of the day, there's no secret or life hack to dealing with adult ASD1 any more than there is for dealing with adult left-handedness. That is to say, if you've functionally made it this far, you've probably already got a handle on it. Thanks, Ben! Hey, thanks for watching this! If you have any questions about sobriety, Japan, or sobriety in Japan, please leave them in the comments and I will get to them next video. Until then, your experience and abilities will carry over.